A world without satellites still produced maps of stunning precision. This is the story of the ancient geographers who charted the world with astonishing accuracy, and by the end, you will understand how their forgotten science fundamentally reshapes our view of human history. How did scholars with simple tools calculate the Earth's size to within a few % of the correct value? And what mysterious source allowed a medieval map to depict a continent not officially discovered for centuries? What does it say about us that their greatest works were lost for 1,000 years, only to guide a new age of exploration when they were found again? The ambition to draw the entire world did not begin with perfect knowledge, but with a profound need to understand. In the great libraries of Alexandria, a scholar would indeed have been surrounded by a chaos of information: scrolls from distant lands detailing trade routes, star charts from Babylonian priests, and philosophical texts debating the very nature of the cosmos. Their task was to weave these threads into a single, coherent picture. The first true maps were born from this collision, mythology giving shape to unknown regions, trade logs providing hard distances, and a new scientific curiosity demanding something more than just a story. Before anyone could measure the Earth with precision, they first had to believe it could be measured at all. This was the great intellectual leap. Ancient cultures like Babylon produced world maps on clay, showing their empire at the center of a circular world disk surrounded by a bitter ocean, less a navigational tool and more a declaration of cosmic order. But in Greece, a different question was asked, not where things were, but what shape they possessed. Philosophers observed the curved shadow of the Earth on the moon during an eclipse, and sailors watched ships disappear hull first over the horizon. The evidence pointed to a sphere, a revolutionary idea that transformed mapping from a flat illustration into a three-dimensional puzzle. This was the essential backdrop, a slow shift from myth to mathematics. These early maps were intellectual projects of the highest order, attempts to impose a human logic onto the vast and terrifying unknown. They were the necessary, imperfect foundation upon which all future accuracy would be built. Yet to truly map the Earth, you first need a fixed point in the sky. For the ancient geographer, the heavens were not just a spectacle, they were a grand and perfect clockwork, a celestial grid painted across the dome of night. This was the first pillar of their astonishing accuracy, celestial navigation. Long before the magnetic compass, cultures separated by vast oceans independently realized that the stars were the only constants in a shifting world of water and land. Their movements were predictable, their patterns eternal. By learning to read this cosmic script, a navigator could determine not just direction, but with careful observation, their position on the globe itself. The principle was elegantly simple in concept, though brutally difficult to master. The height of a given star above the horizon changes as you travel north or south. Sail far enough and familiar constellations vanish below the horizon while new ones rise. This shift in the sky is a direct reflection of your movement on the spherical Earth. To measure it, ancient astronomers employed deceptively simple tools. A basic gnomon, just a vertical stick in the ground, could cast a shadow whose length at noon revealed the sun's angle, and thus your latitude. More sophisticated devices, like the Greek astrolabe or the Arab camel, allowed for precise angular measurements of stars against the horizon. The knowledge required was immense. Polynesian navigators, crossing thousands of miles of open Pacific, memorized a star compass of over 150 guiding stars, knowing exactly which one would rise over a specific island's lagoon. They read ocean swells, bird flights, and the color of the water, but the stars were their primary roadmap. Similarly, Phoenician traders navigating the Mediterranean by night relied on the North Star, Polaris, the one point in the northern sky that appears almost stationary. This celestial fix allowed them to maintain a consistent bearing, turning the chaotic sea into a chartable space. Historians of science note that this was not mere wayfinding, it was active, applied cosmology. The map of the world was, in a very real sense, a reflection of the map of the heavens. By plotting the predictable paths of celestial bodies, these early scientists created a reliable framework onto which they could slowly pin the uncertain shapes of continents and the winding courses of rivers. The night sky was their unchanging reference library, and learning to read it was the essential first step in transforming geography from myth into measurable science. But a celestial framework is only useful if you can translate its angles into earthly distances. The stars gave you your north-south line, your latitude, but how far was it, in actual steps, from one city to the next? This was the second pillar, the mathematics of measurement, and it demanded a different kind of genius, one that could see geometry in a well shaft and the curve of the planet in the length of a noon shadow. The most famous triumph of this thinking belongs to Eratosthenes, the chief librarian of Alexandria in the 3rd century before the Common Era. He heard a simple account from the city of Syene, far to the south, that at noon on the summer solstice, the sun shone directly down a deep well, illuminating the water at the bottom with no shadow at all. In Alexandria at that same moment, a vertical obelisk cast a clear, measurable shadow. Eratosthenes realized these shadows told a story. The difference in the sun's angle between the two cities, he reasoned, must correspond to the curvature of the earth between them. It was a breathtaking leap of logic. By measuring the shadow's angle in Alexandria, he calculated it represented 1/50th of a full circle. He then had the distance between the cities carefully surveyed, a task likely accomplished by professional pacers called bematists, men trained to walk in perfectly uniform strides. Multiplying that distance by 50, he arrived at a figure for the Earth's circumference. His result was within a few percent of the correct value, a calculation made with a stick, a shadow, and the power of pure geometry. This was not magic, it was method. It gave cartography its fundamental scale. Now, any local measurement could be placed within a global context. To build on this, geographers developed systematic ways to capture the landscape itself. Triangulation became a powerful tool. By sighting a distant mountain peak from two known points, you could create a triangle. Knowing the length of the baseline between your two observation points and measuring the two angles to the peak, the rules of geometry allowed you to calculate the mountain's distance without ever walking to it. This principle, using chains, ropes, and simple sighting instruments, allowed for the accurate mapping of coastlines, river courses, and the boundaries of entire provinces. Travelers' tales of a journey taking 20 days could now be cross-referenced with the estimated daily travel distance of a caravan, converting vague time into approximate space. Even the concept of a grid was taking shape. While a full longitude and latitude system was still centuries away, the idea of dividing the world into measurable zones was present. The parallel of latitude, often defined by the length of the longest day, became a standard way to note a location's position north or south. This mathematical toolbox transformed geography. A map was no longer just a collection of places drawn in the relative order a traveler might encounter them. It became an analytical document, a scaled representation where distance and direction had a consistent mathematical relationship. The world was becoming a problem that could be solved, one triangle, one shadow, and one careful measurement at a time. Yet this mathematical precision needed a place to grow, a center where scattered data could be woven into a unified vision. That place was the Library of Alexandria, a name that still echoes with the weight of lost knowledge. More than just a collection of scrolls, it was the intellectual engine of the ancient world, a living network where geography was forged into a true science. Here, under the patronage of the Ptolemaic kings, scholars were not only allowed but encouraged to question everything. to gather every piece of information the world could offer. Ships arriving in the bustling port were reportedly searched not for contraband, but for books. Any scrolls or maps were copied for the library's collections before being returned to their owners. This created an unprecedented repository, a global database on papyrus. Think of the raw material that flowed into those halls, a caravan master's log detailing the days between oases in the Sahara, a Babylonian clay tablet recording the movement of Jupiter, a Greek sailor's sketch of a foreign coastline, and a Persian royal road survey noting exact distances between way stations. Before Alexandria, these were isolated fragments, curiosities in distant lands. Within the library, they became pieces of a single, solvable puzzle. Scholars like Eratosthenes did not work in a vacuum. His famous calculation of the Earth's circumference was only possible because the library gave him access to the specific report from Scene about the well and the sun, and likely the meticulously recorded distance between the two cities from the royal surveyors. He could cross-reference this with other accounts, checking for consistency. This collaborative, comparative environment was the library's true genius. Hipparchus, another giant of geography who worked there, took this further. He is credited with creating the first systematic star catalogue, but he also passionately argued for basing maps on astronomical observations and precise latitude and longitude, a grid system for the entire world. He could do this because he had centuries of celestial records from Babylon and Egypt at his fingertips, allowing him to detect subtle changes even in the stars themselves. The work was iterative and self-correcting. A fantastical traveler's tale of monsters in the far north could be weighed against the more sober accounts of merchants and the hard numbers from celestial readings. The goal was to strip away the myth and find the measurable truth beneath. So what does it mean that this engine eventually fell silent? The decline of the library and its model of centralized knowledge was a catastrophe of a slow, quiet kind. The collaborative synthesis stopped. The careful cross-referencing of documents from 3 continents became impossible as the scrolls were scattered, lost, or simply crumbled away unread. The unified vision of the world shattered back into fragments. Regional maps persisted, trade routes were still traveled, but the grand project of creating an accurate, whole picture of the oikoumene, the inhabited world, stalled and then regressed. For centuries, maps in Europe would become less accurate, more symbolic, often retreating to a simpler, faith-based cosmology. The meticulous measurements of Eratosthenes and the systematic grid proposed by Hipparchus were forgotten, preserved only in fragments in the Arab world, waiting for a rediscovery that would take over 1,000 years. The Library of Alexandria demonstrated that achieving a true understanding of our world requires more than brilliant individuals. It requires a system that connects them, that gathers evidence on a global scale, and has the patience to piece it together. That model of aggregated knowledge was their most powerful tool, and its loss meant that the astonishing accuracy they achieved became not a foundation to build upon, but a distant peak to be glimpsed again only in a far future age. While the library gathered the world's fragments, one man saw a way to lock them permanently into place. Hipparchus of Nicaea was an astronomer first, a man who spent his nights charting the precise positions of the stars. To him, the Earth was not a collection of stories, but a sphere adrift in a measurable cosmos, and he brought that celestial precision down to the ground. His revolutionary proposal was deceptively simple: impose a grid upon the world. Just as he used coordinates to fix a star's position in the sky, he argued every location on Earth should be defined by 2 numbers, its latitude and its longitude. This was the birth of the coordinate system, the very skeleton inside every modern map and GPS device you use today. His method was rooted in the heavens he knew so well. Latitude, the north-south position, was the easier challenge. It could be determined by observing the height of the sun at noon or the angle of familiar stars above the horizon, techniques already in use by navigators. But longitude, the east-west position, was a far more daunting puzzle. Hipparchus understood that because the Earth rotates, time and longitude are directly linked. If you could know the exact time difference between two places, you could calculate their longitudinal separation. The problem was, in an age without accurate portable clocks, knowing the exact time somewhere else was nearly impossible. He proposed a theoretical solution using lunar eclipses as a universal clock. If observers in two different cities recorded the exact local time when the moon entered the Earth's shadow, the difference between those times would reveal their longitudinal difference. It was a brilliant concept, though fiendishly difficult to execute with the tools of his era. This rigorous mathematical mindset led him to sharply criticize the maps of his predecessors. He saw them as hopelessly flawed, not because they lacked information, but because they lacked a consistent system. A map based on travelers' estimates of sailing days or caravan journeys was, to Hipparchus, built on sand. The accounts varied, the conditions changed, and without a fixed astronomical reference, every distance was just an educated guess. He insisted that geography must divorce itself from anecdote and anchor itself to the immutable laws of the cosmos. A place should not be defined as 10 days west of Alexandria, but as having a specific latitude where the sun stands at a certain angle on a specific date, and a longitude determined by a celestial event. This was the pivotal shift from geography as a descriptive art, a collection of places and tales, towards geography as an exact science, a network of points defined by mathematics. Hipparchus never lived to see a world map drawn according to his precise grid. The practical challenges were too great for his time, yet the theoretical framework he built was his enduring legacy. He provided the instruction manual for future accuracy. He gave cartographers the ultimate goal, a map where every city, every mountain, every river mouth could be assigned a unique numerical address on the globe's surface. This idea, preserved and studied by later scholars, would lie dormant for centuries, a seed of pure science waiting for the technology to catch up to the theory. His work represents a quiet but monumental turning point, the moment the dream of a truly measured world found its language. Hipparchus dreamed of a perfect grid, but the data to fill it came from the decks of ships and the ledgers of merchants. For every grand theory conceived in a library, there were 100 practical observations recorded on a rolling sea. The most vital of these were the Periplus, the ancient world's equivalent of a captain's coastal pilot guide. These were not maps in the traditional sense, but sequential, written sailing instructions, a verbal chart of a coastline meant to be memorized or read aloud during a voyage. Think of them as the raw data streams of antiquity, a continuous log of everything a merchant captain needed to know to survive and profit. They listed landmarks, a distinctive mountain peak or a white cliff. They noted safe harbors and treacherous shoals. They recorded the sailing time, measured in days or nights, between one river mouth and the next, and crucially, they described the people who lived there, their goods, and their customs. This was empirical geography, born from necessity and repeated experience. A masterpiece of this genre is the Periplus of the Eratosthenes Sea, a first-century document detailing the trade routes of the Indian Ocean. Its anonymous author, likely a Greek-Egyptian merchant, provides a stunningly practical guide. He does not theorize about the shape of India, he gives you the actionable intelligence. Sail from this port, he instructs, and after a certain number of days you will reach a market town where ivory is cheap, but be cautious of the local rulers' customs officials. He notes the seasonal monsoon winds that make the journey possible only at specific times of year, and he lists the exchange rates for goods, from Roman glassware to Arabian frankincense and Indian spices. For a scholar in Alexandria, this document was a treasure trove. It transformed the vague idea of a distant land called India into a series of connected, measurable points along a coastline. The sailing times could be converted into approximate distances. The descriptions of headlands and river mouths allowed a cartographer to sketch a plausible shape. This was how the blank spaces on the world map were filled in, not by a single explorer, but by the accumulated knowledge of generations of anonymous sailors. These periploi represent the ancient world's most effective form of crowdsourcing. Each voyage added a slight correction, a new detail, a warning about a shifted sandbar. A captain might learn from a local pilot a shortcut or a better anchorage, and that knowledge would enter the shared tradition, passed down and copied over decades. This slow, collective refinement is what allowed the coastal outlines on the best ancient maps, like those of Ptolemy centuries later, to be so surprisingly accurate for regions the mapmakers themselves had never seen. The library scholars synthesized, but the merchant mariner supplied the evidence. It was a partnership between the theorist with his globe and the practitioner with his logbook. Without these humble, grease-stained sailing manuals, the grand cosmic grids would have remained empty, theoretical constructs. The Periplus provided the tangible details that made the map real, connecting the mathematics of the heavens to the gritty reality of wind, current, and commerce. It was the vital link between the stars above and the shoreline below, proving that the quest to chart the world relied as much on the careful observations of countless unknown travelers as it did on the brilliance of a single great mind. The culmination of this centuries-long project arrived not with a new discovery, but with a masterful synthesis. In the 2nd century of the Common Era, Claudius Ptolemy of Alexandria sat amidst the fragments of a fading tradition and performed an act of intellectual salvage that would echo for over 1,000 years. His Geographia was not merely a map, it was a complete system, a user manual for rebuilding the world. Ptolemy understood that the raw data, the periploi, the astronomical readings, and the travelers' tales were a chaotic chorus of conflicting voices. His genius lay in creating a method to harmonize them. He began with a list, a staggering catalogue of over 8,000 places, from the misty shores of Britannia to the trading ports of Southeast Asia. For each, he provided estimated coordinates of latitude and longitude, finally applying the rigorous grid Hipparchus had dreamed of. But he knew these numbers were imperfect, drawn from sources of varying reliability. His critical innovation was a system of evaluation. He would compare multiple accounts of the same distance, note their discrepancies, and use his own understanding of geography and geometry to propose a most likely value. He was, in essence, the ancient world's first data analyst, cleaning the dataset of global knowledge. To transform this list of coordinates into a visual map, Ptolemy introduced another revolutionary concept: map projection. He recognized the fundamental problem of drawing a spherical Earth on a flat sheet of papyrus. His solution was a conic projection, imagining a cone of paper resting like a hat on the globe, touching it along a line of latitude. This allowed the northern hemisphere, where most known lands lay, to be depicted with far less distortion than a simple flat sheet would allow. It was a mathematical trick to preserve shapes and relationships, a cornerstone of modern cartography born from ancient necessity. He also formalized the idea of climatic zones, dividing the world into latitudinal bands from the torrid equator to the frigid poles, theorizing about what lands and peoples might exist in each. This was geography as a predictive science. Ptolemy's world map, reconstructed from his instructions, is a breathtaking artifact of synthesis. It shows a vast, connected oikumene, from the Canary Islands in the west to a greatly enlarged Sri Lanka and a shadowy hint of the Malay Peninsula in the east. The Mediterranean is rendered with remarkable fidelity, a testament to centuries of precise coastal sailing logs. Yet his work also contains profound errors, like an enclosed Indian Ocean and an Africa that curls eastward to join Asia, making the continent far smaller than reality. These mistakes were not failures of imagination, but logical conclusions drawn from the best available data of his time. When conflicting reports said Africa could be sailed around and others said it could not, he made a reasoned choice. The true power of the Geographia was its systematic, reproducible framework. It was a snapshot of the ancient world's knowledge frozen at its peak, and then, like so much else, it vanished from the European mind. The great libraries dwindled, the papyrus crumbled, and the meticulous science of measurement faded into legend. Ptolemy's masterpiece, however, did not disappear. It was preserved, studied, and refined by scholars in the Byzantine Empire and the flourishing centers of the Islamic world, where his coordinates were checked against new astronomical observations and his maps were redrawn with exquisite care. They kept the flame of precise geography alive, waiting for the day the West would be ready to see the world again through Ptolemy's eyes. That rediscovery would change everything. Centuries after Ptolemy, a different kind of map surfaced in an Istanbul palace, a fragment that seemed to defy the very timeline of discovery. In 1513, Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis compiled a world map of which only a portion survives. This parchment fragment depicts the Atlantic Ocean with the western coasts of Africa and Europe, and the eastern shores of South America with startling clarity. But the most haunting detail lies at the southern edge, a landmass some believe represents the coastline of Antarctica, a continent not officially sighted for over 300 more years. The map itself is a work of art and annotation, covered in notes where Piri Reis openly credits his sources. He writes of consulting many maps, including those from the voyages of Columbus, and most intriguingly, he references what he calls the maps of the ancients. This simple phrase ignites the central mystery. How could a 16th century admiral possess knowledge that seems to leap ahead of his era? The scholarly debate is a fascinating exercise in separating evidence from speculation. On one hand, the map's accuracy for the coast of Brazil is remarkable for its time, but it can be plausibly explained by the rapid dissemination of Portuguese and Spanish nautical charts following their voyages. Piri Reis was a high-ranking Ottoman admiral with access to captured charts, spy reports, and a vast maritime intelligence network across the Mediterranean. His inclusion of New World details simply shows he was an exceptional synthesizer of the very latest, if secret, European geographical data. The supposed Antarctica, however, is where theories diverge. Mainstream cartographic historians point out that the landmass at the bottom of the Piri Reis fragment is more likely a speculative extension of the southern continent, a common feature on maps of the period, often labeled Terra Australis Incognita. It could be a composite of mismatched coastlines from southern Patagonia, pieced together from confused sailor reports. The contours bear only a generalized resemblance to the actual Antarctic coastline under its ice, a resemblance that becomes far less precise under close scrutiny. Yet, the more tantalizing interpretation points to those maps of the ancients. Could Piri Reis have had access to a surviving copy of an ancient Greek or Roman world map, one that contained knowledge from a lost exploratory voyage? Or, as some have more speculatively suggested, does it hint at a pre-Columbian transoceanic exchange of knowledge, a fragment of cartography passed down from a civilization with forgotten seafaring capabilities? While these ideas capture the imagination, they remain in the realm of fringe theory due to a lack of corroborating evidence. What the Piri Reis map undeniably tells us, however, is about the fluid, clandestine transmission of knowledge across cultures and epochs. It is a physical testament to a world where information was a supreme currency, traded, stolen, and copied in the shadows between competing empires. The map's very existence in Istanbul proves that the Ottoman Empire was not a passive observer of the age of discovery, but an active, hungry participant, compiling its own global picture from whatever sources it could acquire. It serves as a powerful reminder that the history of science is not a straight line of progress, but a tangled web of lost data, rediscovered fragments, and brilliant synthesis. The map whispers that our understanding of ancient capabilities may still have gaps, that some charts may have been drawn from sources that did not survive the flames of a library or the damp hold of a sunken ship. It challenges us to wonder not just about what was known, but about all that was known and then forgotten. The drive to chart our surroundings is a story written across the entire human experience. While the Mediterranean scholars were weaving astronomy and geometry into a global grid, other civilizations, separated by vast oceans and mountain ranges, were independently inventing their own profound languages of space. Their tools were not bronze astrolabes or papyrus scrolls, but often materials found in their immediate world, used to solve the specific puzzles their environments presented. To see only one tradition is to miss the breathtaking diversity of this ancient project. In the vast Pacific, Micronesian navigators faced a unique challenge: an open ocean with no landmarks, only waves, stars, and the faintest signs of distant islands. Their solution was the stick chart, a deceptively simple-looking artifact made from palm ribs and cowrie shells. These were not maps to be carried on a voyage, but three-dimensional teaching tools, models of ocean swells built from memory and refined over generations. The curved sticks represented the dominant wave patterns and currents, while the shells marked the positions of islands. A master navigator would use these charts to teach his students how to feel the ocean itself, to read the subtle refraction of swells bending around an atoll dozens of miles beyond the horizon, a skill that allowed them to sail across thousands of miles of open water with pinpoint accuracy. This was a hydrodynamic map, a representation of invisible forces, demonstrating a deep, empirical understanding of the sea that functioned perfectly without any concept of latitude or longitude. Far from the ocean, in the meticulously planned cities of the ancient Indus Valley, such as Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, we see a different kind of spatial genius. Their urban layouts reveal a sophisticated grasp of geometry and civic planning on a grand scale. The cities were built on precise grid patterns, with standardized brick sizes, complex municipal drainage systems, and oriented broadly according to the cardinal directions. While no traditional map has survived, the cities themselves are the map, frozen in clay and stone. They represent a large-scale, practical application of cartographic principles, a conscious ordering of communal space that suggests a highly developed sense of measurement and design for thousands of residents. Meanwhile, in ancient China, cartography was deeply entwined with statecraft, astronomy, and a philosophical desire to harmonize with the cosmos. From very early times, Chinese scholars produced detailed maps for administrative and military purposes. One of the oldest surviving maps, from the 2nd century before the Common Era, drawn on silk, depicts the topography of a region with mountain ranges, river systems, and settlements with a remarkable concern for relative location and scale. But perhaps their most distinctive contribution was the integration of the celestial and the terrestrial. Chinese star charts were incredibly detailed, and the concept of an earthly order mirroring the heavenly order was central. This led to practices like geomancy, where the placement of cities, tombs, and buildings was determined by aligning them with cosmic forces and terrestrial features, creating a kind of sacred cartography that blended observation with philosophy. Each of these traditions, the wave-reading stick charts, the gridded city plans, and the celestial terrestrial maps, responded to a different need: environmental, social, or spiritual. They prove that the impulse to measure, model, and understand our place in the world is a universal thread in human culture. Scientific cartography was not born in one library or one empire. It emerged in countless forms, a chorus of different voices, all asking the same fundamental questions about the land, the sea, and the stars above them. This global tapestry challenges any single narrative of discovery, reminding us that the quest for a coherent world is a story we have all been writing, in our own languages since the very beginning. These brilliant theories and observations would have remained mere ideas without the physical means to capture them. The ancient geographer's workshop was not just a library, but a forge of ingenuity, filled with instruments designed to wrest precise numbers from a vast and stubborn world. To turn the curve of the Earth into a line on papyrus, they invented tools of remarkable elegance and sophistication. The most iconic of these was the astrolabe, a handheld universe of brass and engraved coordinates. More than just a navigational aid, it was a portable computer capable of telling time, predicting star positions, and, most importantly for our story, measuring the angular height of the sun or a star above the horizon. A sailor would suspend the astrolabe by a ring, sight a celestial body through its movable alidade or pointer, and read the angle from a finely engraved scale on the disk's edge. This single number, obtained on the deck of a rocking ship, was the key to determining latitude, fixing a ship's north-south position on the globe with a precision that felt almost like magic. On land, for the meticulous work of surveying, the Greeks and Romans employed tools like the dioptra and the groma. The dioptra was a precision sighting instrument, a precursor to the modern theodolite. Mounted on a stand, it could rotate horizontally and vertically, allowing an engineer to measure both the angle and the slope between two distant points. This was the instrument that likely made the detailed planning of aqueducts and the large-scale triangulation of landscapes possible. The Roman groma, by contrast, was beautifully simple. It consisted of a vertical staff with a crossarm, from which plumb bobs were suspended to create perfectly vertical and horizontal sight lines. A surveyor would plant the groma in the ground, look along the lines created by the hanging weights, and use rods held by assistants to mark out right angles and straight lines across miles of countryside. This is how the legendary straight roads and perfectly square military camps of the Roman Empire were laid out, imposing a geometric order upon the natural chaos of the land. For measuring the distances these angles connected, another clever device was essential: the hodometer. Imagine a chariot or a cart with a specially designed gear mechanism connected to its wheel. With each revolution, a pin would engage a gear in a complex train, and after a set number of rotations, usually corresponding to 1 Roman mile, a pebble would drop from a chamber into a collecting box. At the end of a day's journey, the surveyor simply counted the pebbles to know exactly how far they had traveled. Similar devices, using paddles that turned with the ship's motion, were adapted for sea travel, providing a much more reliable estimate of distance than a sailor's guess. Meanwhile, Arab and Indian Ocean navigators perfected their own elegant tool for latitude, the camel. It was a simple rectangle of wood, often with a knotted string through its center. The sailor would hold one knot in his teeth, extend the board until its top edge touched the target star and its bottom edge rested on the horizon, and then measure the length of string pulled out. Each knot corresponded to a known latitude, often a specific port. It was a personal, tactile instrument, encoding vital geographic knowledge into a piece of cord and wood. Each of these tools, from the complex astrolabe to the humble camel, served as a bridge. They were the translators, converting the grand concepts of spherical geometry and celestial mechanics into tangible, repeatable measurements that a human hand could record. They remind us that the map's accuracy was not born solely from abstract thought, but from the gritty, practical work of observation, the patient accumulation of data point by careful data point. This marriage of mind and hand, of theory and tool, is what allowed the lines on their charts to slowly converge with astonishing fidelity upon the true shape of the world. Yet for all their celestial tools and geometric genius, a single, fundamental measurement remained stubbornly out of reach. Longitude, the east-west position on the globe, was the ancient world's great unsolved puzzle. While a navigator could find their north-south line by measuring the sun's height, Pinpointing how far east or west they were of a known point was a problem of a different magnitude. It was a problem so difficult that it would not be conclusively cracked until the invention of an accurate marine chronometer in the 18th century. So how did the ancient geographers, who had calculated the Earth's size and mapped coastlines with such care, confront this invisible barrier? Their attempts reveal a fascinating blend of ingenuity and profound limitation. The core of the problem was time. Because the Earth rotates, every hour of time difference between two locations equals 15 degrees of longitude. If you could know the exact time back at your home port at the very moment you observed noon locally, you could calculate your position. But without a clock that could keep perfect time on a long, turbulent sea voyage, this was impossible. Ancient thinkers understood this principle perfectly. Hipparchus himself had proposed a theoretical solution using lunar eclipses as a universal clock. If observers in, say, Carthage and Alexandria both recorded the exact local time the moon began to enter the Earth's shadow, the difference between those times would give their longitudinal separation. It was a brilliant concept, but executing it was another matter. Coordinating such observations across vast distances was a logistical nightmare, and eclipses are rare events. This method could provide a few precious data points for fixed cities, but it was useless for a ship in the middle of the ocean. In practice, most ancient maps relied on far cruder estimates for east-west positioning. Primary method was dead reckoning, using estimated sailing speeds and travel times. A captain's log might state that a journey from Rhodes to Alexandria took 5 days with a favorable wind. Cartographers would then convert that time into a distance, using an assumed average daily sailing distance. But winds change, currents shift, and a captain's estimate of speed was often little more than a guess. This introduced massive compounding errors. A coastline might be drawn roughly correct in its north-south layout, but stretched or compressed along its east-west axis because the travel times were inaccurate. You can see this clearly in Ptolemy's world map. While the Mediterranean's northern shores are fairly accurate, the entire landmass of Asia is stretched dramatically to the east. His coordinates placed China much farther east than it actually is, making the continent appear vast and leaving the Indian Ocean as an enclosed sea. This wasn't a random error, it was a direct result of relying on overestimated travel times from Silk Road merchants and sailors' tales. Ptolemy was aware of these distortions. His great workaround was to treat his primary meridian, the line of zero longitude running through the Canary Islands, as a fixed reference, and then use all his collected data, however imperfect, to plot everything else relative to it. He made reasoned judgments, sometimes shrinking distances reported by boastful travelers or expanding those from more conservative sources. His map was a best-fit model from flawed data, a monumental effort to impose order on a fundamentally uncertain measurement. The longitude problem placed a hard ceiling on the accuracy of ancient cartography. It meant that while they could create stunningly precise regional maps based on local surveys and celestial latitude, any attempt to assemble those regions into a global whole would inevitably warp, like a picture printed on a sheet of rubber that could only be nailed down along its top and bottom edges. This enduring struggle makes their other achievements all the more remarkable. They mapped the world's breadth without being able to reliably measure its length, a testament to working at the very edge of their technological era. Their solutions were clever, their understanding was profound, and their maps, distortions and all, represent the absolute zenith of what was possible before the invention of a clock that could conquer time itself. The blank spaces on a map are never truly empty. They are filled with the fears, hopes, and stories of the people who drew its borders. For the ancient geographer, the line between a verified coastline and a sailor's tall tale was often blurry, a frontier where hard-won data met the irresistible pull of legend. This was the enduring tension in their craft, the struggle to separate the measurable world from the mythological one that lived just beyond the horizon. A map from this era was not just a scientific document, it was a cultural artifact, and its decorations told a story as important as its coastlines. The phrase "here be dragons" may be more a modern invention than a common ancient label, but the sentiment was everywhere. In the uncharted waters at the edge of the known world, cartographers sketched sea serpents coiled around ships, or placed the blissful Isles of the Blessed, a paradise for heroes, somewhere in the distant Atlantic. These were not mere whimsy, they served a critical function, marking the absolute limit of reliable knowledge. Beyond this point, the mapmaker was saying, we have only stories. And some of the most influential stories came from men like Herodotus, the father of history, who was also a relentless collector of geographic lore. In his writings, he meticulously recorded the accounts of travelers he met, presenting them with a scholar's curiosity, but not always a skeptic's filter. He describes gold guarding griffins in the far north, and ants the size of foxes that dug for gold in the Indian desert. For Herodotus, these tales were data points, however strange, from the edges of the oikoumene. His work represents a pivotal moment where geography was still a broad inquiry into everything about a place, its people, its wonders, and its natural oddities, all bundled together. The fantastical was part of the report, yet even as these myths found a home on parchment, a countercurrent was building. The more scientifically minded geographers, those steeped in the mathematical traditions of Eratosthenes and Hipparchus, began to see these elements as a problem. They were noise in the signal, obscuring the clear lines of geometry and celestial observation. Strabo, writing centuries later, openly criticized his predecessors for filling their works with the marvel mongers stories. He argued that geography should concern itself with the known, the habitable, the places relevant to states and commerce. This was the push for purification, an attempt to strip the map down to its empirical bones. But the purge was never complete because the imagination is a powerful force. When Ptolemy compiled his coordinates, he relied on the best sources he had, but some of those sources were centuries old, layered with legendary geography. His map shows a vast southern continent, terra incognita, which was partly a logical deduction to balance the northern landmasses, and partly a space that still held the promise of mythical lands like the kingdom of Prester John. The tension reveals a profound truth about how understanding grows. The drive for accuracy is not a light that simply turns on, banishing all shadows. It is a slow, grinding process of comparison and correction. A story about dog-headed men in India might persist for centuries until a more reliable merchant, or eventually a first-hand observer, reports simply on the customs of a particular tribe with unique ceremonial dress. The monster retreats and a human culture takes its place. The mythical gives way to the merely foreign, and the map becomes a little more accurate, a little less fearful. This dance between knowledge and lore shows that mapping the world was never just about measuring distances. It was a continuous negotiation between what was seen, what was reported, and what was dreamed, a process where the human mind slowly, painstakingly, learned to trust the evidence of the lead line and the astrolabe over the seductive whisper of the old, uncharted dark. A caravan did not just carry silk, it carried secrets of the world. The vast arteries of the Silk Road, stretching from the imperial courts of China to the bustling forums of Rome, functioned as the ancient internet, a slow but relentless transmission network for the most valuable commodity of all, geographic intelligence. For over 1,000 years, this was the physical backbone of the collaborative map. While ships plied the coasts, overland caravans moved through mountain passes and across deserts, and with every bale of fabric and every pouch of spice came stories, measurements, and sometimes precious sketches. A Roman merchant in Antioch might acquire a rough chart from a Parthian trader, who had gotten it from a Bactrian who had copied it from a Sogdian intermediary who had traveled from the Han frontier. Knowledge traveled in fragments, passed hand to hand, language to language, each transfer adding a slight distortion or a crucial correction. This was how the world slowly pieced itself together across continental divides. The exchange was not merely anecdotal. Formal mapping systems began to influence one another. Chinese cartography, advanced and systematic, employed a precise grid system for centuries, dividing the land into measured squares. While it is unlikely a full Chinese grid map made it to Rome, the principles and the concept of such systematic representation traveled with diplomats and learned monks. Conversely, Greco-Roman concepts of a spherical Earth and celestial coordinates filtered eastward along these same routes. The very names on maps testify to this flow. The Romans knew of a distant, silk-producing land they called Seers, a name derived from these long chain of reports. Ptolemy, sitting in Alexandria, could list coordinates for the Saracen capital, Syra, not because any Roman legion had marched there, but because the cumulative reports of countless middlemen had provided a distance and a direction that he could mathematically plot. Each caravan stop, each merchant's ledger entry, each traveler's description of a river crossing or a mountain range was a data point in a planetary survey that took generations to complete. This was a multicultural project in the truest sense, a Chinese surveyor's measurement of the Tarim Basin, a Persian geographer's description of the Caspian Sea, and a Greek astronomer's calculation of latitude for the city of Bactra could all eventually wind up on the same parchment in Alexandria or Chang'an. The accuracy of the best ancient world maps, therefore, was never the product of a single brilliant civilization. It was a mosaic, a composite picture painstakingly assembled from thousands of individual tiles, each contributed by people of different languages and faiths, all moving along the same dusty, perilous, and information-rich roads. The Silk Road reminds us that before globalization there was interconnection, a slow weaving of separate truths into a shared, if still imperfect, understanding of our vast and wondrous world. The survival of a map was as fragile as the papyrus it was drawn upon. In an age before mass production, every scroll was a unique artifact, vulnerable to a single moment of disaster. The story of how these precise documents endured is not one of luck, but of a deliberate, centuries-long relay race across cultures and continents. The mediums themselves were a first line of defense. In the dry Egyptian climate, papyrus could last for generations, but elsewhere it quickly succumbed to damp, mold, or insects. The shift to parchment, made from scraped and treated animal skins, was a technological leap for durability. A parchment codex, the ancestor of the modern book, was far more resilient than a fragile scroll. It could be bound, shelved, and handled repeatedly without disintegrating. Yet the material was only the beginning. The true guardians of this geographic knowledge were not kings or generals, but scribes. In the scriptoria of medieval monasteries, by the flickering light of a single candle, anonymous monks undertook a sacred task of secular preservation. Their mission was to copy religious texts, but often included within the same volumes were the works of classical geographers, philosophers, and scientists. With meticulous care, they reproduced not just the words of Ptolemy or Strabo, but painstakingly redrew the complex coastlines, grids, and annotations of their maps. Each copy was a minor miracle of manual labor, a hedge against the total loss of the ancient world's intellectual legacy. This work was not passive transcription, it was active stewardship, though it came with a price. Errors could creep in with each generation of copying. A mountain range might shift slightly, a place name could be misspelled, but the core knowledge was kept alive. While Western Europe entered a period where large-scale cartography regressed, a parallel and crucial chapter was unfolding to the south and east. In the great centers of learning in Baghdad, Cordoba, and Damascus, Islamic scholars were not merely preserving Greek geography, they were revitalizing it. They translated Ptolemy's Geographia into Arabic, calling it the Kitab al-Geographia, and then they did something remarkable: they tested it. Using more advanced astronomical tables and reports from an empire that stretched from Spain to India, they corrected his coordinates, redrew his coastlines with new data from Arab traders, and expanded the map southward into Africa and eastward across the Indian Ocean. Scholars like al-Idrisi, working in the court of the Norman king Roger II in Sicily, synthesized this Islamic geographic tradition with remaining European knowledge to create new, stunningly detailed world maps. The so-called Dark Ages in Europe were, in many ways, a golden age of geographic science elsewhere. This fragile chain of transmission, from Alexandrian scholar to Byzantine copyist to Baghdad translator to monastic scribe, underscores a profound truth. The accuracy achieved by the ancients was not a self-sustaining achievement. It was a whispered secret passed carefully from one century to the next. It survived because individuals, often separated by faith and language, recognized its value. The survival of Ptolemy's work, rediscovered in Europe and translated from Arabic back into Latin in the early 15th century, was not a minor miracle. It was the direct result of this unbroken, multinational effort. When Renaissance scholars first laid eyes on his coordinate tables and precise projections, they were not seeing a relic, they were receiving a baton, passed hand to hand across 1,000 years of careful keeping. That fragile parchment was the seed from which a new age of exploration would definitively grow. Ptolemy's world map was a masterpiece of synthesis, but it was not perfect. Among its elegant lines and carefully plotted coordinates lay subtle, yet monumental, errors that would ripple across centuries. One of the most consequential was his calculation of the Earth's circumference. While Eratosthenes had come remarkably close, Ptolemy chose a different, smaller estimate, shrinking the planet by about a quarter. This was not a random mistake, but a reasoned choice based on what he believed were more reliable sailing reports from the Atlantic. He also dramatically extended Asia eastward, turning the Indian Ocean into a landlocked sea and leaving a relatively narrow strip of ocean between Europe and Asia's far eastern shores. These were not failures of intellect, but logical conclusions drawn from the best available yet deeply flawed data. His sources overestimated travel distances across Asia, and reports of the Atlantic were vague and frightening. When faced with conflicting numbers, he made a judgment call, and that call would echo in the ambitions of future explorers. The legacy of such an error is a fascinating study in unintended consequences. When Christopher Columbus planned his westward voyage to Asia, he consulted the geographical authorities of his day, and Ptolemy was among them. He seized upon the smaller Earth circumference and the extended Asian continent, because together they made his audacious plan seem not just possible but practical. The vast, unknown Pacific Ocean that actually lay between Europe and Asia was absent from his calculations, replaced by Ptolemy's shrunken Atlantic. This miscalculation is what gave Columbus the courage to sail into the western void, believing the Indies were just a few weeks away. He was, of course, profoundly wrong about the geography, but his error led him to an entirely new world. This is the deep irony of cartographic mistakes. They can close one door of understanding while accidentally kicking open another. A map's flaw became a catalyst for a discovery that would render the old map obsolete. Other errors had different roots. The persistent belief in a great southern continent, Terra Australis, was less about bad data and more about theoretical elegance. Scholars from Ptolemy onward felt the land masses of the northern hemisphere needed a counterbalance to the south to keep the world from tipping over. This was geography guided by a sense of symmetry and philosophical balance, a beautiful idea that filled the empty southern oceans with a phantom landmass for over 1,000 years. It was an error born not from ignorance but from a desire for cosmic order. Similarly, the detailed but entirely fictional islands that peppered medieval and Renaissance maps often came from misreadings, hoaxes, or optical illusions. A low cloud bank on the horizon could be charted as a new land, and once inscribed on a respected map, that island could stubbornly persist for generations before a later explorer finally sailed through its coordinates and found only open water. Examining these mistakes does not diminish the ancient geographers, it completes their picture. It shows us that the map has always been a living document, a hypothesis about the world constantly tested by new evidence. Every era was a point of friction between theory and reality, a place where the model broke down and demanded revision. The process of correction is the very heartbeat of science. When a sailor returned with a report that contradicted the chart, it forced a choice: to cling to the authority of the old parchment or to scrape the vellum clean and redraw the line. This slow, collective editing is how the blob on a map gradually sharpened into the recognizable shape of a continent, and how a mythical sea monster was replaced by the accurate notation of a prevailing current. Their errors were not dead ends, they were signposts, marking the limits of the known and daring the next generation to venture beyond them. To study these old maps is to witness a conversation across time, a dialogue between what was believed and what was truly there, a conversation we are still having today as we refine our own models of the world and the cosmos beyond. For centuries, Ptolemy's world had been a ghost in the libraries of Europe, a legend whispered among scholars. Then, in the early 1400s, a manuscript arrived in Florence, carried by a Byzantine scholar fleeing a crumbling empire. It was a Greek copy of the Geographia, and its impact was electric. Here was not a simple map, but a complete system, a set of instructions for rebuilding the entire known world with mathematical precision. To the thinkers of the Renaissance, drowning in symbolic medieval maps that placed Jerusalem at the center of a disc-shaped earth, Ptolemy's work was a revelation. It was a recovered blueprint from a more rational age. Scholars scrambled to translate it from Greek into Latin, the language of learning, and printers used the new technology of movable type to reproduce his coordinate tables and map projections for a hungry audience. For the first time in a millennium, Europeans held in their hands a vision of the world that was coherent, systematic, and breathtakingly vast. The maps drawn from his instructions, known as Ptolemaic maps, showed a spherical Earth crisscrossed with lines of latitude and longitude, from the Fortunate Isles in the west to the Sears and Sinus Magnus, the Great Gulf, in the east. This was the dry tinder, a dormant framework of incredible sophistication, and it was about to meet the spark of new observation. The true power of this rediscovery lay in its fusion with fresh reports from the very edges of the world. Navigators like Vasco da Gama, who sailed around Africa to India, and Christopher Columbus, who stumbled upon the Americas, were bringing back crude charts and sailors' logs that described lands and seas completely unknown to Ptolemy. Renaissance cartographers now faced an exhilarating puzzle. They had Ptolemy's precise grid, a ready-made coordinate system for the entire globe, but it was suddenly, obviously incomplete. They did not discard the ancient framework, they used it to organize the new chaos. Think of it like a painter receiving a beautifully sketched outline of a landscape, only to discover entirely new mountains and rivers on the horizon. The wise painter does not throw the sketch away, they extend the lines, blending the old perspective with the new vistas. This is exactly what happened. Mapmakers like Martin Waldseemüller, in his famous world map of 1507, placed the new American continents within a modified Ptolemaic projection, giving them a spatial relationship to the old world of Europe, Africa, and Asia. He even coined the name America on that very map, forever linking the new discovery to the old tradition of geographic recording. This fusion supercharged exploration itself. Ptolemy's map, for all its errors, provided a baseline, a hypothesis to test. When his enclosed Indian Ocean was proven open by da Gama's voyage, it didn't discredit the ancient geographer, it completed him. His coordinate system gave explorers a language to report their findings with newfound precision. A captain could now estimate a new coastline's latitude with an astrolabe and report back that it lay along a specific parallel, allowing cartographers to place it accurately on the expanding grid. The ancient framework became the scaffold upon which the modern world was built, piece by astonishing piece. This was the ultimate testament to the enduring utility of their work. The Renaissance scholars realized that Ptolemy and his predecessors had not given them a finished map, but something far more valuable, the tools and the mindset to create one. The Age of Discovery was not a rejection of ancient knowledge, but its triumphant, if long-delayed, application. The old maps had been waiting not to be copied, but to be corrected, extended, and brought to life by the very journeys they had, in a way, inspired. The rediscovery proved that the most accurate vision of the future is sometimes hidden in the careful, measured lines of the past. A map's precision could be a weapon as much as a wonder. For all their mathematical beauty and celestial inspiration, the charts born in Alexandria and Rome were never created in a political vacuum. They were, from their inception, deeply entwined with the machinery of state, tools designed not just to understand the world, but to administer it, tax it, and ultimately to dominate it. The very act of measuring a territory was often the first step in claiming it. Consider the Roman agrimensors, the land surveyors who followed the legions. Their precise grids, laid out with the simple groma, did more than plan roads. They carved newly conquered lands into orderly parcels for veterans, for public sale, and for the imperial treasury. A wilderness transformed into a numbered plot on a map was a wilderness subdued, its value quantified and brought under Roman law. The map was the legal document that made ownership and taxation enforceable, turning landscapes into revenue streams with chilling efficiency. This pattern repeated across empires. Accurate coastal charts enabled naval patrols and the projection of power across the Mediterranean. Knowledge of a mountain pass' exact location was a military secret, and a map detailing the distances between cities was a logistics manual for moving armies. The geographer's work, in the hands of a general or an emperor, became a lever of control. This ethical dimension forces us to ask a difficult question: who was this accuracy for? The benefits flowed primarily to the centers of power, to the imperial capitals that commissioned the maps and the merchant elites who used them to monopolize trade routes. The astonishing detail of the Periplus of the Eratosthenes Sea, for instance, was a commercial intelligence report guiding Greek and Roman merchants to ports where they could extract wealth. The people living on those charted coasts were often reduced to notations about their resources or their potential for trade, their own names for their homes sometimes erased in favor of foreign labels. In this sense, a map could be an act of silencing. Complex, living landscapes with their own histories and sacred sites were flattened into a set of exploitable features. Regions deemed unimportant to trade or conquest might be left blank or filled with monstrous symbols, their inhabitants marginalized not just geographically, but conceptually, placed outside the civilized world as the map defined it. This is not to diminish the scientific achievement, but to see it in its full human context. The drive to measure the Earth was fueled by curiosity, but it was bankrolled by ambition. The same grid that allowed for breathtaking accuracy also provided the framework for dividing and controlling the very lands it described. Recognizing this duality adds a crucial layer of understanding. It reminds us that knowledge is never purely innocent, and that the history of geography is also a story of conflict, of seeing the world not only as a home but as a prize. The lines on the parchment were lines of communication, but they could also become the borders of exclusion. the blueprints for empires that saw the whole world as something to be measured, owned, and ruled. The lines they drew were not just guesses but predictions waiting for a future technology to verify them. In a remarkable twist of history, the very tools that rendered their methods obsolete are now proving just how right they often were. Satellite imagery and geospatial analysis, the pinnacle of our modern perspective, are scanning the Earth and finding the ghostly fingerprints of ancient geographers etched into the landscape. This is not about proving old maps were perfect, but about revealing the startling consistency of their foundational work. Take the coordinates Claudius Ptolemy assigned to cities across the Mediterranean. For centuries, scholars viewed them as a brilliant but inherently flawed reconstruction, a best guess from incomplete data. Yet when researchers began converting his ancient Greek degrees of latitude and longitude into modern GPS equivalents, a pattern emerged. For well-known centers of trade and governance, places like Alexandria, Rome, and Carthage, Ptolemy's plotted positions often align with the actual sites to within a few dozen miles. Given that he was working from travel times, star sightings, and the reports of others, this level of agreement is extraordinary. It suggests his methodology for synthesizing conflicting reports into a single, coherent grid was not just clever but systematically reliable. The correlation is too consistent to be accidental. It tells us that when the ancients had good data, they knew exactly how to use it. This validation extends beyond simple points on a grid. Modern analysis of coastal outlines on some medieval portolan charts, those detailed sailing maps of the Mediterranean, shows a precision in the shape of harbors and the angles of capes that seems to defy their era. By overlaying these parchment coastlines with satellite photographs, researchers have observed matches so close that they imply a method of surveying we have not fully understood, perhaps involving detailed bearing measurements taken from the sea itself. It is as if we are finally reading the fine print of their technical skill, a language we are only now becoming fluent enough to decode. What does this mean for our historical assessment? It forces a profound shift. We can no longer view their accuracy as a series of lucky breaks or isolated genius. Instead, we must see it as evidence of a sustained, rigorous scientific culture capable of achieving reproducible results. Their tools were simple, but their intellectual framework was robust. They established protocols for observation, verification, and error correction that created a legacy of knowledge durable enough to survive the collapse of their world. This convergence of ancient and modern science closes a loop 2,000 years in the making. The satellite in space, measuring the Earth with laser light and precise timing, finally confirms the calculations made with a shadow and a string. It is a powerful narrative of continuity in the human quest to understand our planet. We are not so much surpassing their vision as we are finally fulfilling the technical potential their theories always held. They built the conceptual model, we have built the instruments to prove it. This partnership across time challenges the very notion of historical progress as a straight line. It suggests that knowledge can be a spiral where we circle back to old ideas with new eyes, discovering that the pioneers were not gazing at myths, but at the same physical reality we study today, and they were measuring it far more clearly than we ever allowed ourselves to believe. Their maps were not just pictures of the world as they knew it, they were hypotheses about the world as it truly was, and modern technology is, point by careful point, confirming the hypothesis. The silence of a lost library speaks volumes. Our entire understanding of ancient geography is built on a fragile fraction of what once existed, a handful of parchments that survived the relentless winnowing of time. For every map we can study today, a dozen others have crumbled to dust or vanished in flames, leaving behind only tantalizing whispers in historical texts. These lost maps represent the great unknown variables in our equation of the past. The Roman historian Pliny the Elder casually mentions consulting a world map commissioned by Agrippa that was displayed in Rome, a massive public work detailing the empire's roads and provinces. Not a single copy survives. The great library of Carthage, burned during the city's final destruction, was said by ancient sources to have held countless navigational charts from Phoenician mariners who may have sailed far down the African coast or even into the Atlantic. We have only the Romans' word for what was lost. In China, meticulous imperial geographies and maps from the Han and Tang dynasties, products of vast state-sponsored surveys, have disappeared into the chaos of wars and dynastic collapse. What did they show? The speculation is not idle fantasy. It is a necessary exercise in historical humility. Could a detailed Carthaginian Periplus have proven they circumnavigated Africa 2,000 years before Vasco da Gama? Might a complete set of Chinese charts have revealed knowledge of the Pacific currents and the western coasts of the Americas, hinted at in some controversial artifacts and legends? These lost works force us to confront a haunting possibility. The astonishing accuracy we admire in a Ptolemy or an Al-Idrisi might not represent the pinnacle of ancient cartography, but merely the highest surviving peak, with other, perhaps greater mountains now submerged beneath the sea of time. Consider the practical implications of such a loss. Each map was a node in a network of knowledge. When the Library of Alexandria suffered its gradual decline, it wasn't just one copy of a text that vanished. It was the unique collection of comparative sources that allowed scholars to cross-check and verify information. A single lost port chart from an Indian Ocean trader could have contained the corrected longitude for a crucial spice port, a data point that would have shaved centuries off the error in later world maps. The loss is cumulative and cascading. One missing link breaks the chain of transmission, and the knowledge it carried reverts to rumor, then to myth, and finally to silence. This fragmentary record should make us cautious about drawing hard lines on the map of human capability. The sudden, precise appearance of certain landmasses on later medieval maps, like the controversial interpretation of the Piri Reis fragment, becomes far more intriguing when we admit the possibility of a lost source. It doesn't require ancient astronauts or sunken continents, simply the acknowledgement that a skilled geographer in the 1st century might have compiled a master map from now vanished reports, a map that was copied, faded, and was perhaps the very map of the ancients that a Turkish admiral cited centuries later. Pondering these ghosts is not about rewriting history with wild claims. It is about recognizing that history itself is a paleontology of ideas, where we are left assembling a skeleton from a few scattered bones. The true shape of the ancient world's understanding may be far grander and more interconnected than our surviving library shelves suggest. Every lost map is a reminder that the past was likely richer, more detailed, and more knowing than we can ever prove, a silent testament to the fragility of knowledge itself and the countless human stories of discovery that have left no trace at all. A map does more than guide a journey, it shapes the journey of the mind itself. The meticulous works of the ancient geographers, once confined to scholars and navigators, slowly seeped into the very foundations of education and culture, becoming a quiet force that expanded humanity's conception of its own home. In the great schools of the Hellenistic world and later in the medieval universities, the works of Ptolemy and his predecessors were not merely geography texts, they were core philosophy. To study the Geographia was to engage with a model of a spherical, ordered cosmos where every city had a logical place defined by mathematics and celestial observation. This was a radical curriculum. It taught students that the world was not a flat disk under a domed heaven, but a body in space governed by laws that could be measured, understood, and predicted. This intellectual framework was a direct challenge to older, more insular worldviews that placed one's own homeland at the literal center of creation. The map, in this sense, was a teacher of humility and wonder, shrinking the familiar and revealing the vastness of the terra incognita waiting beyond the horizon. This shift in perception rippled far beyond the classroom, deeply influencing literature and religious thought. When medieval poets and theologians began to encounter these recovered ideas, their imagery of the world transformed. The concept of a spherical earth found its way into works like Dante's Divine Comedy, where the structure of the afterlife is intimately tied to the geography of a global planet. The idea of antipodes, peoples living on the opposite side of the globe, moved from heresy to a fascinating theological puzzle about the unity of humankind. The map provided a new canvas for the imagination. It replaced a world bounded by mythical oceans with one that was open-ended, interconnected, and tantalizingly incomplete. This fostered a profound sense of a knowable universe. If the coast of Africa could be charted and the breadth of Asia estimated, then perhaps everything in time could be brought into the light of knowledge. This was an intellectual liberation as significant as any political revolution, a slow awakening to the reality that humanity inhabited a single, shared sphere. The legacy of this cartographic accuracy is, therefore, not found solely in the lines on parchment, but in the lines of thought it inspired. It nurtured a mindset that valued evidence over tradition, measurement over myth, and connection over isolation. The ancient geographers gave the world a grammar, a way to speak about distance, location, and scale that transcended any one culture or creed. Their maps became seeds planted in the fertile ground of scholarly curiosity that grew into the towering tree of global awareness we now take for granted. They taught us that to know where you are, you must first dare to measure the world, and in doing so, you inevitably discover your place within a story far grander than any single kingdom or creed could ever contain. Precision could be a canvas for the sublime. To hold an ancient world map is to encounter an object of breathtaking duality, where the rigorous lines of geography are cradled within a frame of pure artistry. These were not mere tools for navigation, but illuminated manuscripts of the earth itself, masterpieces where every flourish of ink and stroke of gold leaf served a purpose beyond decoration. The drive for mathematical accuracy existed in a profound harmony with the human need to create beauty, proving that to chart the world was also to celebrate it. Consider the Hereford Mappa Mundi, a monumental map from around 1300. At first glance, it seems to defy all we know of scientific cartography. Jerusalem sits firmly at the center of a circular world, and the continents are shaped more by theological narrative than by surveyors' measurements. Yet to dismiss it as inaccurate is to miss its genius entirely. Its value lies not in geographic precision, but in cosmological storytelling. Every inch of its vellum is a densely illustrated encyclopedia. Around the edges of the known lands, you find wondrous creatures and strange peoples described by Herodotus and Pliny. Biblical scenes unfold in miniature, and the path to salvation is literally mapped onto the landscape. The artistry here is functional, a mnemonic device that organizes vast realms of spiritual and natural knowledge into a single, comprehensible image. It was a map meant to be read and contemplated, a visual sermon that placed the viewer within a divine order. In stark contrast, yet equally magnificent, are the world maps from the Islamic Golden Age. Here, artistry served the cause of scientific clarity. Cartographers like Al-Idrisi produced works where coastlines were rendered with careful, often surprisingly accurate curves, but these were inscribed within elaborate geometric borders and adorned with exquisite calligraphy. The decorative rosettes and interlacing patterns were not random. They helped organize information, directing the eye across grids of longitude and latitude. The beauty of the script itself, a sacred art form, elevated the data it conveyed, signaling that the act of recording God's creation was a worthy and reverent pursuit. The map became a testament to both human intellect and divine harmony. Even the practical portolan charts, the workhorse maps of Mediterranean sailors, are things of quiet beauty. Their coastlines are drawn with a confident, flowing line, and their interiors are alive with a standardized yet elegant art. Cityscapes are shown as clusters of tiny towers. Each range of mountains is drawn with a delicate, scalloped pattern, and the seas are crisscrossed with room lines radiating from ornate compass roses in a spiderweb of navigation. This visual language was instantly recognizable to a mariner, turning complex data into an intuitive picture. The lavish colors: azure seas, burnished gold leaf for important cities, crimson for royal seals, were not just for show. They created a hierarchy of information, making the map faster and easier to use in the dim light of a ship's cabin. This marriage of science and art reveals a fundamental truth about the ancient worldview. They did not compartmentalize knowledge. Understanding a river's course was part of the same pursuit as understanding the mythical creatures that might dwell near its source, or the celestial patterns that governed its floods. The rational and the spiritual, the measured and the imagined, were threads in the same tapestry. A map was a total representation of reality as they perceived it, blending observed fact with cultural belief, all rendered with a craftsman's love for form and color. The beauty was not an afterthought. It was the medium through which the map's deeper meaning, whether spiritual, political, or intellectual, was communicated and remembered. In these objects, we see that the quest to know our world has always been, at its heart, a creative act. While some maps captured the curve of the earth, others charted the pulse of an empire. Unrolled, the Peutinger table stretches over 22 feet in length, a breathtaking parchment scroll that feels less like a picture of the world and more like a schematic diagram of Roman power. This is not a map concerned with coastlines or the shapes of continents. Its focus is singular: the road. A traveler in the late Roman Empire would not use this to visualize the Mediterranean Sea, but to plan a journey from Londinium to Antioch, understanding every stop, every change of horses, and every provincial border along the way. Its genius lies in a radical, practical distortion. The known world is stretched and flattened like a modern subway map, prioritizing connections over true geography. Italy and the Balkans are elongated, while Spain is compressed, all to fit the entire network onto a portable scroll. This was accuracy redefined for a specific human need: the need to move people, goods, and information across thousands of miles with reliable efficiency. To read it is to decode a symbolic language. Cities are marked with small building icons, baths with a tiny figure, and temples with a distinctive pediment. Most importantly, the distances between way stations, the mutations for changing horses, and the mansions for overnight rest are meticulously noted in Roman miles. These numbers were not estimates, they were official, maintained figures, the result of centuries of surveyors' work with their gromers and hodometers. A state courier could glance at this map and know that the next fresh mount was exactly 8 miles ahead, and a full rest stop in 23. This logistical precision reveals the astonishing administrative machine that was Rome. The map itself was a product of that system, likely copied and updated from official records for use by imperial officials and perhaps wealthy merchants. It shows a world utterly connected, where a road leads seamlessly from the heart of Gaul to the gates of Persia, every leg measured, every junction documented. The Peutinger table proves that cartographic brilliance could take a completely different form. It traded the celestial accuracy of a Ptolemy for a topological and logistical truth, a representation of relationship and distance rather than shape and form. It tells us that for the Romans, understanding space meant understanding movement, control, and time. In its long, winding lines, we see not just a map of roads, but the central nervous system of an ancient superpower, still whispering the rhythms of its ceaseless, organized motion. The world beneath their feet was not a stage but a stage in motion. Before a single coastline could be measured, the ancient geographers had to solve the most fundamental puzzle of all, the very shape of their home. For millennia, the dominant human experience suggested a flat earth, a solid plain under a dome of sky, with edges that might drop off into nothingness or be encircled by a primordial ocean. Babylonian world maps etched on clay tablets perfectly capture this view, showing their empire at the center of a circular disk, surrounded by the bitter waters of chaos. This was a powerful model, one that matched everyday perception and reinforced a cultural sense of cosmic order. But a handful of thinkers began to notice cracks in this flat reality. The Greek philosopher Pythagoras, in the 6th century before the Common Era, was among the first to propose a spherical Earth, not from physical observation, but from a beautiful philosophical conviction. He and his followers believed the sphere was the most perfect, harmonious shape, and therefore the cosmos and all celestial bodies, including the Earth, must share this form. It was an argument from elegance, a leap of faith in a mathematical ideal. Yet soon, the evidence began to mount in support of this radical idea. Aristotle, the great systematizer of knowledge, would later compile the observable proofs that turned philosophy into compelling science. He pointed to the Earth's shadow on the moon during a lunar eclipse, which was always a gracefully curved arc, never a straight edge. Only a sphere casts a circular shadow from every angle. Sailors provided another crucial clue, watching ships disappear hull first over the horizon, as if sinking into a curved surface with the masts vanishing last. Even more telling was the change in the night sky as one traveled. Stars that were visible in Egypt would dip below the horizon for observers further north, while new constellations would rise in the south, a phenomenon that only makes sense on a curved surface. This collective evidence was overwhelming for those willing to see it. The flat Earth model could not explain these facts, but a spherical Earth explained them all with a single, elegant geometry. This conceptual shift was the silent, revolutionary foundation for everything that followed. It meant the world was not an infinite plane to be filled with guesses, but a finite body that could, in theory, be measured, circumnavigated, and fully known. It transformed geography from a descriptive art of listing places into a predictive science of calculating distances and relationships across a globe. The greatest tool was indeed this powerful, correct idea, a mental model that allowed Eratosthenes, just a few generations later, to look at a shadow in a well and see the curvature of an entire planet. Without first accepting the sphere, his famous calculation would have been meaningless, and the dream of an accurate world map would have remained forever out of reach. The most honest feature on any ancient map was its empty space. Beyond the carefully inked coastlines of the Mediterranean and the plotted caravan routes of Asia lay vast, silent regions labeled simply as terra incognita, the unknown land. This was not a failure of the geographers, but a testament to the sheer physical and technological frontiers they faced. Their astonishing accuracy had limits, defined by deserts, oceans, and the simple fact that no reliable witness had ever returned from certain places to tell the tale. Consider the source of the Nile River. For the Egyptians, this was a divine mystery, the origin of the life-giving floods that sustained their civilization. Greek and Roman scholars inherited the puzzle. They received tantalizing reports of great inland lakes and snow-capped mountains far to the south, but the Sud, a vast, impassable swamp in what is now South Sudan, formed a formidable barrier. The combination of disease, hostile climates, and the logistical nightmare of navigating such terrain meant the Nile's true source remained a subject of myth and speculation for over 1,000 more years. Similarly, the interior of sub-Saharan Africa was a blank on their maps, not out of disinterest, but because the Sahara Desert acted as a colossal filter. Trade routes crossed it along narrow, well-established corridors, bringing gold and ivory from the south, but they did not bring back detailed surveys of the lands beyond. The knowledge that filtered north was fragmented, often turning powerful kingdoms into legends and leaving the continent's true shape and scale a profound mystery. The Atlantic Ocean presented perhaps the most daunting psychological frontier. Known as the Outer Sea or the Sea of Darkness, it was the absolute edge of the navigable world. While Phoenician and Carthaginian sailors may have ventured down the West African coast and possibly even reached the British Isles, the open Atlantic westward was a realm of terrifying stories of sea monsters, unnavigable fogs, and a point where the very ocean poured off the edge of the world. The technology simply did not yet exist for safe, long-range oceanic exploration. Ships were designed for coastal sailing and the predictable winds of inland seas. Without the lateen sail or advanced navigation techniques for open water, and without the economic or political imperative to risk everything, the Atlantic remained a barrier, not a bridge. These blank spaces are crucial for a balanced understanding. They remind us that the ancient geographers were not omniscient. They were brilliant synthesizers working within a constrained sphere of information. Their known world, the oikoumene, was a connected band of civilizations encircling the Mediterranean and stretching east to India. Their accuracy was applied to this network. What lay beyond its edges was for them a different kind of geography, one still written in the language of possibility, fear, and wonder. These empty spaces on the parchment were an invitation, a silent acknowledgement that the map was not finished, and that the greatest chapters of discovery were still waiting to be written by those who would one day dare to sail into the void and fill the blanks with new, hard-won truths. The tools of the geographer were forged in the fires of other disciplines. To truly grasp the world, the ancient scholar had to be a master of many arts, weaving threads from the heavens, from the language of shapes, and from the stories of the past into a single, coherent tapestry. This was not a specialization, but a synthesis. The most accurate maps were born at the crossroads where astronomy met geometry, where history informed location, and where even poetry gave shape to the unknown. Consider the work of Strabo, whose 17-volume Geographica is as much a work of cultural history as it is of cartography. He did not merely list coordinates, he painted portraits of places. To describe a city, he would detail its founding myths, the character of its people, the quality of its harbors, and the battles fought on its plains. For Strabo, the where of a place was inseparable from its who and its why. A mountain range was not just a line on a grid, it was a historical barrier that had shaped the destiny of nations, a fact as crucial to understanding the region as its latitude. This blending of narrative and measurement created maps that were intellectually rich, offering context that pure mathematics could never provide. The connection to astronomy was the most vital of all, a partnership that defined the very accuracy we have been tracing. Every reliable latitude measurement, the north-south anchor of their maps, came from observing the sun or the stars. The advance of geometry directly enabled the leap from local sketches to global projections. When a thinker like Ptolemy devised his conic projection to flatten the sphere, he was solving a geometric puzzle of the highest order, applying abstract theorems about cones and circles to the practical problem of fitting the world onto a sheet of parchment. This was applied mathematics of the most elegant kind. The flow of knowledge moved in both directions, a beautiful symbiosis. A geographer plotting a new coastline would provide fresh data points for astronomers refining their models of the Earth's size. Conversely, a new astronomical table from Babylon with more precise calculations of the sun's path would allow a cartographer to correct the placement of 100 cities. Even the poetic imagination played its role. Before a distant land could be measured, it had to be imagined. The epic poems of Homer, with their descriptions of the encircling ocean river, provided an early, mythic framework that later geographers would spend centuries testing, correcting, and ultimately replacing with hard-won data. The poet's vision gave them something to aim for, a horizon to sail toward. This interdisciplinary approach was their greatest methodological strength. It allowed them to triangulate truth using multiple sources of evidence. A strange animal reported by a historian could be cross-referenced with a trader's log. The description of a river's course in a poem could be checked against a surveyor's measurement. They built their picture of the world not from a single type of evidence, but from every type they could gather, trusting that the convergence of stories, stars, and numbers would lead them closer to reality. In this light, the ancient map emerges not as a simple chart, but as one of humanity's first great interdisciplinary documents, a meeting place for every way we have of knowing our place in the cosmos. Their legacy is not simply ink on parchment, but a permanent shift in human consciousness. From the star-guided voyages of ancient mariners to the mathematical genius of scholars in Alexandria, this story is a profound testament to curiosity and intellect. We have traced their methods from the simple gnomon measuring a shadow to the sophisticated astrolabe reading the heavens. We have seen their triumphs, like Eratosthenes calculating the Earth's size, and their honest errors, like Ptolemy's shrunken globe that accidentally inspired a new world. Their maps were never just paper and ink. They were visions of cosmic order, tools for vast empires, and the very sparks that ignited ages of discovery. These lines drawn centuries ago still resonate in the digital grids of our satellite navigation, in the very way we conceive of our planet as a single, interconnected home. Their relentless pursuit to measure and understand mirrors our own modern endeavors to map the ocean floor, chart distant galaxies, or model the complexities of our climate. They remind us that the drive to know our place in the cosmos is a timeless human signature. If this journey into the roots of cartography has sparked your curiosity, please subscribe for more explorations into the mysteries of our past. And we would love to hear your thoughts. Which of these ancient visionaries, from the practical sailor to the theoretical genius, most inspires your own sense of wonder about the world?